Oh, hey, I didn't see you there. I was too busy reading my favorite poet, T.S. Eliot. We all know about T.S. Eliot because in high school, our high school English teachers made us slave away over wastelands without telling us some of the really cool things about T.S. Eliot that actually make his work really interesting. I'm going to do that for you and probably change your lives. Let's start with his life. T.S. Eliot was born on September 26, 1888 in St. Louis, Missouri. He lived in St. Louis for much of his childhood, and the location actually inspired much of the city imagery in his later poems. Eliot started at Harvard in 1909 and met his first love, Emily Hale, in 1912. She did not reciprocate his affections, however, and upon this rejection, Eliot moved to England in 1914, where he married his first wife, Vivian Highwood, in 1915. Eliot's relationship with his first wife was toxic, to say the least. Vivian was medically and emotionally unstable, and though Eliot cared for her, they were not romantic. Vivian responded to this lack of intimacy by having affairs, while Eliot took a vow of chastity in 1928, shortly before writing Vivian to inform her of their separation. After this separation and Vivian's subsequent death, Eliot rekindled his acquaintance with Emily Hale. The two exchanged many letters, and Emily came to visit him often. Although Eliot claimed he was no longer romantically interested in Emily, and in 1957 took a second wife by the name of Valerie. Eliot was 38 years her senior, but the two seemed happy, and they remained together until Eliot's death in 1965. Now let's get into some interesting facts. As I mentioned before, Eliot and Emily exchanged many letters. Eliot, for some reason, burned all of Emily's responses. However, because he would have been quite famous at this time, Emily donated all of his responses to Princeton University. Upon finding this out, Eliot asked that they remain sealed until 50 years after they both were dead. True to their word, Princeton University left the letters sealed until January 2nd, 2020, where upon opening them, they found that at the time of writing, Eliot and Emily had a not entirely platonic and emotionally intense relationship. However, because of their distance, Eliot would have remained, for the most part, alone. It was during the time that Eliot and Emily were writing letters to each other that he wrote his book, Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats, a book of poetry entirely about cats that was later adapted into the popular musical we all know as Cats. My last little tidbit for you is that despite Eliot's seemingly robust love life, he was often referred to as awkward and rather clunky around women. This sort of attitude can be seen in some of his poems, such as the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock that he wrote while he was attending college. Winter evening settles down, with smells of steaks in passageways. 6 o'clock. The burnt-out ends of smoky days, and now a gusty shower wraps the grimy scraps of withered leaves about your feet. And newspapers from vacant lots, the showers beat on broken blinds and chimney pots, and at the corner of the street, a lonely cab horse steams and stamps. And then the lighting of the lamps. The morning comes to consciousness of faint, stale smells of beer from the sawdust-trampled street, with all its muddy feet that press to early coffee stands, with the other masquerades that time resumes, one thinks of all the hands that are raising dingy shades in 1,000 furnished rooms. You tossed a blanket from the bed, you lay upon your back and waited. You dozed and watched the night revealing the 1,000 sordid images of which your soul was constituted. They flickered against the ceiling, and when all the world came back, and the light crept up between the shutters, you heard the sparrows in the gutters. You had such a vision of the street as the street hardly understands, sitting along the bed's edge where you curled the papers from your hair or clasped the yellow soles of feet in the palms of both soiled hands. His soul stretched tight across the skies that fade behind a city block, or trampled by insistent feet at 4 and 5 and 6 o'clock. and short square fingers stuffing pipes, and evening newspapers, and eyes assured of certain certainties, the conscious of a blackened street, impatient to assume the world. I am moved by fancies that are curled around these images and cling, the notion of some infinitely gentle, infinitely suffering thing. Wipe your hand across your mouth and laugh. The worlds revolve like ancient women gathering fuel in vacant lots. Prelude means something that serves as an introduction to something else that is often more important, which makes this poem kind of interesting because you don't know exactly what this is a prelude for. This poem displays a sordid and grimy city image in which people are repeating actions of their day-to-day in a tired, trudging sort of way. He uses some rhyme, but not in any sort of consistent manner. The poem is kind of sing-songy, but still heavy due to the free form of the verses. Just when you think there's a rhythm, it changes and makes the tone drop to a more somber one again. The first stanza paints this image of the evening. People headed home, washing off the work of the day. They're tired, they're trudging, but they're going home, they're going to do something else. The second stanza is similarly gray. The same people are headed to coffee shops to start their day while their activities from the night before linger in the air. The third stanza describes an action that all people tired of the day have likely taken. Lying in bed, going over the things weighing you down, and suddenly waking in the morning to do everything over again, on worn feet, with tired hands. The fourth stanza is interesting because it starts in a similar way to the other three. A man stretched thin from his city life that is posing as everything there is to be. Then it shifts, implying that though these things might be repetitive, there can be a beauty in them. Things go on, and they will continue to go on. This is one of my favorite poems by TSEliot because it reminds me to just kind of take a step back from what I'm doing when I'm tired, when I don't want to do the same old, I don't want to go to work, I don't want to go to class. And it reminds me to look at kind of those little things. We all have stuff that we have to do, but the little things make it easier and more worthwhile. Thank you all so much for listening to me. I hope I changed your minds about T.S. Eliot, and you can go on to read his work with greater enjoyment in the future. Thank you all so much for listening to me. I hope I changed your minds about T.S. Eliot, and you can go on to read his work with greater enjoyment in the future.